The guy who owns the handle Matthew colon Matrix org has arrived. He fixed his teleportation issues from London and is now here in the main hall of the space station. Get yourself a seat. There are some seats in the first row still available. And listen to his upcoming talk about the Matrix State of the Union. And give him a warm welcome. Hey, Matthew.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Jan, for the introduction and also for letting me talk about Matrix here at the Matrix Community Summit. As I guess you probably know, I'm Matthew. I'm project lead for Matrix and also day job CEO and CTO at Element. And thought it would be useful to try to summarize where things are at right now. So I consider this basically a follow-on from the talk that I gave at FOSDEM, imaginatively called Matrix 2.0, how we made Matrix go boom, which at the time was slightly aspirational. Now it's actually happened, and you may have seen that we shipped a whole bunch of stuff yesterday so that people can actually play with the shiny new Matrix 2.0. Well, not really new features, basically the speed-ups and the improvements of Matrix 2.0. So I'm hoping that people have had a play with Element X and seen what it does. And basically, I wanted to talk you through the process there, what's been going on, a little bit of what's coming up, and also where things are at. Also, I apologize if I look blank when people come up and say, "Hello, Matthew, it's so good to meet you," and I have no idea who you are, because I will know you from your Matrix ID and your avatar, but probably not your real name, and definitely not your corporeal, physical human form. So apologies if I look blank. Right. Let's hope. No, it's a perfect time to do a software update. So, first of all, where are things at, just in terms of some raw stats? This is literally the graph I showed from FOSDEM, except we just hit that little blip there at the beginning of the year. In terms of the total number of MX IDs, and this is literally the aggregate stats of every synapse out there on the network going and phoning home the number of users that it has on it. We're up to about 113 million users, up from about 4 mil back in 2018. Slightly different graph showing monthly active users across the Federation reported by the same sort of metrics, getting up to about 3.5 million at the moment. A bit more of a random walk as people come and go, and occasionally people do a load test for 1 million users, hence that big spike there. Well, I guess a month-long load test if they're turning up. Oh no, actually, any load test because it's over the course of a month. But either way, graphs are up and going to the right overall. Something people often say when they see the 113 million graph is, really? I don't know 113 million people on Matrix. And that is because roughly half of them are bridged. And so I went and pulled out the difference between folks who have been tagged as coming in from an application service on the phone home stats versus everybody. And you can see almost precisely half of the people who get reported there are actually being sucked into the Matrix vortex, not of their free will via the magic of bridges, but it does mean that the yellow graph at the bottom, which is now up to, I guess, 62 million, 64 million or so, are the actual real MX IDs out there. That does include guest users as well, for full transparency. So when somebody clicks on a random, I know, element.io/app style link, or sorry, app.element.io/link, and they find themselves looking at a guest view of some random room in Matrix, and they will get counted there. But it still gives a reasonable idea, at least of the shape, if not of the absolute axis. So, Matrix 2.0, woohoo! It is not yet a spec release. Lots of concern and panic that we suddenly cut a new spec release and changed the version major number without telling anybody. Instead, we're basically proposing, as we did at FOSDEM, that 4 very big chunky MSCs, the entirely new sync API of sliding sync, the entirely new group VoIP semantics and native matrix, entirely new authentication APIs, and also the major changes needed to support lazy loaded server joins should, on aggregate, be considered worthy of a new version of Matrix once they land in the spec. So warned about this, foreshadowing it in the last year's summer blog post, which I think was just before last year's Matrix Community Summit. Then we announced it at FOSDEM, and then yesterday we actually got implementations out there of the native OIDC support, as well as native group VoIP, complete with end-to-end encryption in Element Core. And we obviously already had sliding sync and faster joins out there, so now the all aspects of Matrix 2.0 are ones which people can and hopefully are playing with. So let's go through these one by one. Sliding sync, you probably know it, hopefully love it, may hate it, in that you have to run a proxy to use it. And the idea of sliding sync is that it only syncs the data that you need to render the user interface at any given time. This is inspired shamelessly by me going and opening up the network inspector whilst Discord was open to try to see how they ended up with hundreds of thousands of members in their servers or whatever they call their communities, and saw quite an interesting API where they were literally loading just the bits that you need, and then as you paginate down the list, it goes and pulls in more stuff, but also as that list gets updated, they would go and add things into the list, remove them, shuffle them around, almost a little virtual machine that is telling the client how to render that list based on the window that it's looking at. Now, that's basically the inspiration for sliding sync, and it should give you instant login, instant launch, instant sync. Instant login is a little bit aspirational, particularly if you've got OpenID Connect turned on, or if you're using the proxy, which everybody is, because other than the experimental conduit support, there isn't any native sliding sync implementations out there yet. Obviously, the first time that you log into the proxy, it has to suck up all of your initial sync from your home server, so that will take a while. And there are some scenarios with OpenID Connect where it will do that whenever your session refreshes when you log in to a new device. But in general, for sort of the happy case, instant login, definitely instant launch. So my account has gone from being about 10 seconds on Classic Element to about 100 milliseconds on Element X to launch on iOS, and then always instant sync. And in fact, the profile of the sync timings is a bit weird, because it turns out the initial sync on sliding sync, i.e. starting from cold, is faster than incremental sync, very unintuitively. So what we do is to expire your sessions after about 30 minutes by default on the proxy. So after 30 minutes, the proxy just gives up and forgets all about the clients which are connected to it. Next time you try to sync your device, it goes and says, okay, clean slate, let's go get things up and running again. So in case you do notice some slightly slow syncs on sliding sync, this is caused by probably it being about 29 minutes since the last time that you used the app, where there's a bunch of scroll back that's accumulated in 2 device events. And there's this kind of worst case scenario where it might take a couple of seconds rather than a couple of 100 milliseconds to sync. But so far, I don't think anybody's noticed it apart from me, who is particularly obsessed with fast sync times, having been completely traumatized by the agony of using Classic Element on mobile on my account. There have been lots and lots of iterations on the API, using Element X as a guinea pig to drive it forwards. At the beginning, I guess last year, we started off saying, hey, we're going to have a single window over the room list like Discord has, except for room lists. And as you kind of swipe up and down your room list on the phone, it's going to talk to the server and pull in additional rooms at the top and bottom, depending on where you are. And we mocked it up in a little web jig that people might remember. We also implemented it in Element Web, and it felt pretty good. And we felt pretty smug and thought we'd created the ultimate API, and we implemented it on Element X, and it sucked. And the reason that it sucked is Apple made a terrible promise to their users in 2007 when they launched iOS, in that they included things like the photo gallery on iOS, which has got incredible performance. Even on a really crappy first-generation iPhone, you can infinite scroll at as fast as you like, and you will never see placeholder. It will give you this beautifully hierarchically loaded in thumbnails of all of your photos. Now, as a result, everybody who has ever owned a smartphone has got used to the idea that you should be able to infinite scroll through a list and immediately within a frame see contents without there even being a placeholder. So if you're talking to a server, which is like 100 milliseconds away, or heaven forbid you're on a bad internet connection and it's a couple of seconds away, the idea that you scroll your room list and then sit there staring at little spinny things for about 2 seconds until, whoop, oh, there are my rooms, would feel awful. So this was a bit of an embarrassment, and we thought, well, hang on a sec, no, total disaster. Then we realized that particularly power users navigate their room list by search. Like, I never scroll my room list personally unless I'm very bored trying to find interesting things to look at. Instead, you say, I want to talk to Johannes, and I go and type Johannes in. And if the search isn't absolutely instant, again, it's like, why am I waiting for this thing to tell me where my room is with Johannes? Surely it knows. So again, the latency of talking to the server, even to just do a quick lookup, there could be bad, particularly on a bad connectivity. So all of this basically took us to round 2 of sliding sync, where we said, hey, perhaps we should just load the whole room list anyway. So we'll still keep the sliding window in round 3, and we will use this to preload the chat history in the rooms which you're currently looking at. So if you scroll down the list, it will go to the server, pull in the most recent 20 messages of the rooms you're looking at, so that if you click on one of those or tap on one of those rooms, you'll immediately get the chat history. That will be great. But meanwhile, actually, the room list will already be there, and we'll gradually load it in the background, starting with the bare essentials, and then expanding it out over the course of like 30 seconds or so, so that all of the data is there, so you can search it instantly, and you can search through it instantly. And that's how it's implemented right now, today, in Element X. However, we have some additional problems. First of all, the server doesn't actually know the right order for rooms in your room list, because the order depends on encrypted messages, and the server doesn't know what those messages are, and therefore it doesn't know if they're visible. Are they marking your rooms as unread? Do they have keyword mentions in them? And this will be even more true if and when, and it's more like when now, that we encrypt state events, because the server won't even know the name of the room, so it won't be able to do an alphabetical ordering or something like that. So the design on this was always, with sliding sync, that, it's okay, the server can do an approximate ordering, which will be pretty good, and then the client will have to go and spider the encrypted rooms, figure out whether it really was visible or not, and slightly tweak the ordering. And that is, I think, the optimal solution. But the complexity is really starting to ramp up. And empirically, over the course of the year, we've had a lot of iterations to just get the basic API running as intended. And I don't know, for those of us who mess around implementing against APIs, the best API, let's face it, is the one where you do not need to read the documentation, because the shape of the API obviously tells you how to use it. It's nice and intuitive. It isn't full of footguns. Unfortunately, empirically, sliding sync is full of footguns, and there are a lot of people who've been working on Element X who are kind of struggling around with a slight limp, having gone and shot themselves. So, long story short, we're very likely to simplify the sliding sync API. It will have very similar semantics, at least for the subset that we have in Element X, but we are removing the footguns one way or another. And the idea is that the server will incrementally send the right data in roughly the right order based on what it knows about that data, but then the client is responsible for all of the ordering. So critically, you would no longer have a sliding window here at all. You instead go and gather it up into a big room list. And it turns out that there are many other scenarios where sliding windows aren't actually a good fit. So if you want to preload scroll back for the visible rooms that the user is looking at, if it doesn't match the sliding window, you basically want to just tell the server, give me the messages for those rooms. And likewise, when you're searching the room list, the set of rooms, God knows what it is. So you need a new API of some kind that says, hey, give me all of the most recent messages in this set of 20 rooms. Matrix just doesn't have that today. So in the near future, you should expect a new API tentatively called /timeline, which will be a little bit like /messages that will both help with bulk loading scroll back for sets of rooms, potentially for helping with grabbing history when you get a push notification coming in, doing so efficiently as possible, and also making sure that it plays nicely with sliding sync, because at the moment there are some fairly embarrassing things which we ironically fixed in Sync v2, but were bugs in Sync v1, which have now come back in sliding sync, or Sync v3, where you don't actually know how to marry up /messages with the messages that you've received via /sync. So just a heads up, the sliding sync, even though personally I think it feels amazing in Element X and is super fast and snappy, it's still going to have a little bit of iteration on the MSC before we propose it for merge. Enough on sliding sync. Let's talk about native group VoIP. For as of yesterday, there is at last end-to-end encrypted, scalable, as in many hundreds of people, video conferencing in Matrix at last, which used to be the most common request. In the early days of Matrix, people would say, oh, I mean, JITS is great, but where is the native Matrix VoIP? Well, here it is. So this, again, has gone on a bit of a journey in that nowadays the call signaling is being set up via Matrix, albeit using timeline events rather than two device messages, which is the proposal in MSC2023, although Florian, are you out there somewhere? Yeah, we haven't updated MSC2023 yet, right? Okay, so at the moment, basically, this funky new native group VoIP is completely off spec, so we need to update the MSC that describes it. But the current behavior is using timeline events rather than two device messages. And then for the scalable conferencing, we are using a selective forwarding unit, or a conference focus, basically the thing that mixes together the voice and video feeds made by a lovely company called LiveKit. LiveKit's a bit like Element in that it's an open source startup building on an existing open source project. The open source project that they build on top of is called Pion, which is the excellent Go language WebRTC stack. And you may recall that we were building our own selective forwarding unit in Go on top of Pion. In fact, it was contributed by Sean Dubois, who's my equivalent at Pion in terms of being project lead, who's a fan of Matrix, and thought, you know, I can get more people to use Pion if I go and implement a Matrix MSC2023 selective forwarding unit in it. So we did this. Called SFU to SFU. We subsequently took it over, renamed it to Waterfall, got it up and running to show that decentralized cascading conference servers could work in Matrix, and then realized that we don't have enough people or time to do an excellent job of turning it into a full-blown industrial strength SFU. So LiveKit basically does that. They take the Pion stack and they make amazing conferencing servers on it. So in the interest of pragmatism, we took the Element Core UI, put in the LiveKit implementation in SFU, and signaled the existence of the calls and the membership and when it starts and when it ends via Matrix. And you end up with this hybrid where the kind of high-level call management is done by Matrix, but the actual low-level WebRTC signaling is currently using the LiveKit API. In practice, it works really well. If you haven't played, has anybody not played with the new core.element.io? 1, 2, 3, 4 people. Can we do a quick live demo or something? Let me go and find a web browser. Now, I guess we're going to have the problem of distributing URLs around the place, because if I go over to here, and we go into the non-standard deal review room, or we go into the Matrix Community Summit, MCS, and I'm just going to hit go on that. Then, first of all, you can see there is a little encrypted sign here. However, the way in which the, Inception, Matthew. The way the end-to-end encryption works currently is that there is a shared secret that is actually needs to be put in the URL when you go and invite people to the room. So it's critical that you hit the share button here, hit the copy link thing, and discover that your Element Nightly, for a change, has gone and run out of RAM. So instead, I will show you how amazing Element X is on macOS if you haven't seen it, because bang, there we are, my entire Element X account in and up to date. And I'll set poor old Element Web re-going in the background because it will take at least 2 minutes to log in, unlike Element X. So Matrix Community Summit, I guess, is where I should be going here. And I shall go and check the URL in there. And if you look at the URL, you'll see the imaginative word password on the end has got this great big horrible string, which isn't actually shown currently in the URL bar here, because we don't want people taking screenshots or screen sharing and accidentally leaking the thing everywhere. Oh, hello, Timo. Fancy meeting you here. So you can see how this thing is working. And this is using end-to-end encryption, as I say, using a static key for now. But in the near future, if it doesn't fall over, then it will be using proper matrix end-to-end encryption for the identity, using sender keys to actually identify people based on their real end-to-end encryption personae. Some of the nice things we can do in Element Cool is to go and, I don't know, double click on people and drag things around. We can change the layout so that it does it automatically, or that it's got the grid view to do it for us. I think that's changed a bit. Either way, you get the idea. I think it's awesome. And it's fun to finally have that available to everybody. So we've got 12 people in there right now. This is very new. It's still technically a beta. The thing keeping it in beta, other than just needing a little bit more QA than the 24 hours that we've had so far since this release was cut, is the ability to embed it properly into Matrix. Do I need to refresh this or something? I'm going to blame the connectivity here. I'm sure this isn't the SFU melting. But yeah, but we want to be able to embed it into rooms properly rather than just putting in a web view, and we want to share the Matrix client inside Element Cool with the one inside the host app, which we call Matroska embedding. Right. So the intention here is, well, obviously to replace Jitsi with Element Cool, but then also to converge the full mesh calling that we previously had with Element Cool and the pure matrix signaling with the LiveKit-based signaling in SFUs. In an ideal world, LiveKit would be using Matrix as the API to talk to their SFU. Depending on how well this goes and how well the Matrix API evolves to support this, that might well happen. But for now, we've got a pretty nice pragmatic compromise between something that works, which is still using Matrix, and will shortly use Matrix's end-to-end encryption. And a couple of other things to just call out here is a really nice thing on the LiveKit implementation is that it is literally only subscribing to the visible streams at the resolution requested in the room. So as you go and zoom in on people, it says, hey, hello, Mr. Selective Forwarding Unit, give me the bigger resolution, or hey, that thumbnail scrolled off the bottom because we shifted to a view where it's off the bottom of the page, and it just completely stops transferring media. And even more excitingly than that, if you change tab, whilst on Element Cool, and wait a second, you will notice that the bandwidth suddenly disappears on your network connection because it realizes that you've hidden the window and no longer need to subscribe to the video feeds, which is kind of nice. Right, moving on to OpenID Connect. So, the great transition of our time, even bigger than when we got rid of self-signed certificates in Synapse about 4 years ago, is the transition to native OpenID Connect. There are so many benefits here, it is untrue. And no, to be honest, when this was first proposed by Contin, who's been the champion of OpenID Connect and now supported by Hugh, I was pretty skeptical. Because one of the things we wanted to do with Matrix is to make it so easy to use the API, and what's the easier way to log in than go and hand a username and a password to /login, and you got an access token and you're in. You never need to worry about anything else. In retrospect, this was a terrible mistake because it means, for instance, that Synapse still doesn't have two-factor auth. Doesn't have MFA, doesn't have passkeys, doesn't have any of these nice authentication, hygiene, quality of life things which the rest of the world enjoys, because we basically accidentally, organically drifted into building our own authentication API. And I think Contin made an excellent, the point where it really clicked for me was that we had offsite at Element, and he stood on stage in front of everybody and said, I got a hot take. Matrix is a communication API. It is not an authentication API. We should not try to build an authentication API, and then listed, frankly, the vulnerabilities that we'd had over the years due to having tried to build our own authentication API. So really, we want to burn it with fire, kill it in every way imaginable, and replace it with proper OpenID Connect. So this will give us the ability to shack up to an existing identity provider with all of the latest bells and whistles for smart cards and biometric scans and DNA samples and whatever else. No more, and from a dev perspective, again, this really came home to me when looking at the Element X implementation. you don't need to waste your life implementing weird matrix auth APIs anymore. You can just pull in an IDC library that will give you a much more polished and beautiful experience for going and actually authenticating the user. And also on the server side, you don't need to do this. And you wouldn't believe the number of home server projects over the years who decided to implement the spec starting at the beginning. And if anybody has read the spec recently, the first like 4 chapters of the spec are just about authentication. And so I forget, I think Pallium was the first one written by Ericsson in Go, and they started off by doing endpoints there. And Rumor, which obviously eventually became the object library for Rust for Matrix, started off as a home server, and Jimmy Quadra again started off trying to implement matrix auth. Never got as far as creating rooms or sending messages or anything, or at least for months, because you fall into this horrible rabbit hole of implementing this weird custom auth API. So it will make life so much easier for client and server developers. Another big thing is that users will end up sending their password to their identity provider in their home server. They will not keep typing their password into some random matrix client they just pulled off GitHub, which may or may not be logging it to standard output and or accidentally sending it in a RAID shake to some logging server somewhere. Gives you consistent auth and account management no matter what app you're using. So you go and hop onto some fancy new Matrix client and you want to do a basic thing like, I don't know, kick out the device afterwards. You know that you can always go and manage that device membership in one place. It's really good news for password managers. You tell your password manager the URL of your identity provider when it remembers your password, and then no matter what Matrix client you use, it will populate up the password correctly and log you in when you want. Likewise, it will allow you to share your auth between different Matrix apps. So you log in once on the identity provider, switch to a different app you've never used before, and it already knows who you are if you want to. Gives us access token refresh, which is a long-term embarrassment that if somebody spots your access token because you're doing a talk on stage like this and you alt-tab to a terminal and it's sitting there and it goes on YouTube for posterity, hypothetically, then you don't have to kick off that device. Instead, you know that it will only be valid for a couple of minutes. And then finally, it opens the door to OIDC scopes to let users control what features their app can access. So if you want to, I don't know, log into Element Call and only give it access to create video calls or participate in video calls, and you do not want Element Call randomly going through all of your encrypted chat history or sending non-call events on your behalf or something, then you can really lock it down and say, hey, this bot is allowed to only access rooms in this space or this room. All complete vaporware right now, my speciality, but it at least gives us the opportunity to do it in the future. So, is anybody running Matrix authentication service yet? Okay, so admittedly, it was only really publicized yesterday as something that you can do, but this is the way in which we've implemented the new OpenID Connect stuff. In some ways, it's a bit like the sliding sync approach in that it could be integrated natively into the home server, but again, it's been done by a totally different team in a totally different language, this time Rust rather than Go. And we wanted to work with other people's home servers, particularly whilst we're developing on it. And the approach taken with MAS, or MAS as we call it in English, or MAS as we call it in German, is that you go and embed it into Synapse effectively as a module eventually. But right now you run it alongside. And it provides the basic user interface for login, permissions, and generally looking after your Matrix account, imagine I spelled management correctly, in the normal user interface for OpenID Connect. Again, let me do a quick demo. Is this going to work? Let me try going to the corporate element home server, which I very rarely use. Yeah, here we go. I'm already logged in. Let's go and dump out of this. And, sorry. How do I actually sign out of Matrix element these days? I do not want my encrypted messages. There we go. So this has been hard-coded over to the element.io home server. And in fact, you know, what I should have done is just go in on, say, develop instead. So you can see the full experience, except, no, sorry, changed my mind. Let's go back to here. So let's go and sign in. It's hard-coded to element.io, hit continue, and this now, you will see the URL has changed to mass.element.io. So this is the element mass instance, and it's got this slightly different vibe because it's being provided by the server. It's not part of element anymore. It's the server asking for permission to see my profile, view my messages, and messages on my behalf, as you would expect from a fully featured client like Element. Hit OK, give it permission. And, well, as it happens, it's already remembered my SSO session on the key cloak that we run at Element for identifying people. And so that was it. In some ways, the most anticlimactic demo ever, other than poor Element Web now taking 10 minutes to log into my account. And you have to verify it, and you're basically into the normal flow. So I guess I could have kept myself out of Keycloak, or I could do it in an incognito window, but we don't have time. You get the idea that basically it is defaulting everybody to having their login and logout managed by the server rather than being done by the client. And Element X has got really, really nice inbuilt support for this. In fact, perhaps I can show that quickly. So I think this Element X instance here is... Yeah, so that's actually currently logged in on the same thing. If I go here and sign out, and I again hit continue to log back in again. Let's see what happens. About to sign into matrix.org. I do not want matrix.org. I want to have element.io. About to sign into element.io. Hit continue. And this, look at this. So this is now, even though this is an iOS app, it's sufficiently integrated that it's asking macOS to chuck open a browser, which takes me through to the mass flow, hit continue there, and that's it, I'm in. So this is the power of the system, that you can just take a random client like this, and I didn't even need to authenticate myself because I already had the credentials hanging around in mass to prove that I was who I am. Right, where now? There are some limitations. We don't have migration tools for existing home servers yet, which is probably why no one's running this already, but it is coming soon. Also, we don't have full backwards compatibility for normal Matrix clients. Specifically, if you try to deactivate your account, it won't work. If you try to kick out your devices, it won't work. And if you try to change your email address, it won't work. I believe that will be fixed, or can be fixed. But if you want, and obviously you need to have a client that can speak it, which means Element X, Element Web, as we just saw, and Third Room. Faster joins, really not much to say, other than we did all the hard work and shipped it. And the good news is that you can now join a big room like Matrix HQ very rapidly and send and receive messages. However, getting at the scroll back is still blocked on the full join completing, I believe, which frankly sucks a bit because people join the room and the perception that they have joined the room is that they can see what's in the room rather than that they can send messages or receive new ones. So there's still work to be done there. There's also a lot of processing that still happens on joining a room. So it's a bit of a weird one. On one hand, all the hard work happened, and it did speed up a bit. It does need a little bit more work, though, to realize the full potential, and we're trying to schedule that in as best we can. Then, other stuff, Rust SDK. So, talked a lot about the spec and the server side of Matrix 2.0, but there's been a lot of implementation work client-side to actually make this happen. All the heavy lifting being done by Rust SDK, and then Element X sitting on top of it. Probably the most important thing from my side is the Matrix SDK UI crate, which was new as of, I think, May, and provides high-level UI abstractions for the more tricky bits of writing Matrix clients like Element X on top of Rust SDK. It gives you a really high-level UI for lazy loading the room list so that you don't end up pulling thousands of rooms into a single UI table in the app, which is, again, a big deal for power users in lots and lots of rooms because it slowed down the whole launch operation. Instead, what it does now is to mix together the stuff which is cached on disk with the sliding sync response, paginate it, lazy load it, and pull it up into the app. Similarly, for timelines, if anybody's implemented a Matrix client, you know that actually getting a good view of a timeline is surprisingly subtle once you have to worry about redactions and reactions and edits and how do we do threads and all the other edge cases, and you want it to be super fast and you want it to lazy load and all that good stuff. So again, this is a really high-level API for giving you a timeline as basically a list of the things which you should render. Another one is just the sync spinner, which is a surprisingly hard thing to get right in terms of the app telling you when it's showing you stale data or not. So that's all really, really cool stuff. And the amount of work that has gone into Rust SDK is diabolical. So if you're looking for a good SDK, this should be the flagship one from the core team now. Also, on the Rust SDK, we are finally converging the encryption implementations between the new shiny Rust one and JavaScript SDK as used in Element Web and other JS SDK clients. And so this is embedding Matrix Rust, or Matrix SDK crypto from the Matrix Rust SDK, putting it inside the JavaScript SDK so that we are sharing at last the same code base. This is critical. It allows us to fix encryption bugs in one place, get a single code base audited, avoids us reinventing the wheel and introducing new bugs in multiple places. It's taken a long time to get there, but it should, cross fingers, I've been promised, land next week. At which point, you will find that the encryption in Element Web will speed up by a factor of 6, and it might even work. Right, other stuff going on. The Digital Markets Act. Now, lots and lots of work has been happening on the European Union Digital Markets Act interoperability. The whole idea of tech interoperability between the big gatekeepers, the Googles and the Apples and the Facebooks, etc., honestly happened with quite a lot of encouragement from myself and Amandine wearing our Matrix hoodies, going and talking to the EU and saying, you know, if you're doing antitrust regulation here, we have a precedent that shows that it is possible to do interoperable and secure communication, and it's called Matrix. And let's give you a demo, and we'll give you a demo using bridges, and you can see how much it sucks and how much it wouldn't suck if the things we're bridging together natively spoke something like Matrix. And it was honestly a bit of a stretch that the EU would have actually legally mandated interoperability, but they did. So since then, it's been a bit of a roller coaster to try to actually turn this into real life. We mentioned at IETF in San Fran about 2 months ago now that we worked with Google to actually implement a native matrix bridge in Messages by Google, or Android Messages, to demonstrate how interop could work. I hasten to add, this is very much an experiment. This is not a commitment from anybody to actually have Google talking matrix, blah, blah, blah. But it was really interesting to see a big company like them say, okay, well, you've got to be DMA compliant. How should we do this? This matrix thing looks interesting. How would this actually work? Can we get it talking end-to-end encryption? And it does. I honestly feel quite happy that the reason that we selected Signal and the double ratchet for Matrix's encryption back in 2015 was because, well, Signal was already speaking it, but at the same time, everybody else was selecting it too, whether that was WhatsApp or Skype or I think Google were talking about using it in their products at that point as well, like Allo from memory had double ratchet end-to-end encryption. And as it happens, the dialect of the double ratchet that they use is compatible with Ulm, pretty much. So it was possible to get it all working, including attachments, which is pretty cool. Now, off the back of that, we produced a dialect of matrix called linearized matrix, which is a simplified subset of the protocol specifically for interoperability between really big outfits. And one of the things which became very apparent is that even though we in the matrix ecosystem very, very much value replicated rooms spread across servers, if you are a company who's been regulated by the EU into interoperability, you don't necessarily want fancy Git-style replicated rooms. You just want to not go to jail, not get fined, and actually interoperate. So we took the cue to say, hey, what would Matrix look like if you have a simpler version which has the same events, has the same signing, but rather than being a full mesh of replication, you have a hub and a spoke, but critically that hub and spoke is compatible with normal Matrix too. So you get best of both worlds. You end up replicating between folks like us, but then if you're a big outfit who needs to implement a big table implementation of it or whatever it is, then you don't have to know what state resolution is, basically. So that's what linearized matrix is and where it's come from. Now, meanwhile, in the IETF, there is this working group called MIMI, the More Instant Messaging Interoperability Working Group. This is formed by the MLS, the Messaging Layer Security Working Group, who, having completed MLS, which you may have noticed is now RFC 9420, an interesting number, is intended to be the next generation group end-to-end encryption system, replacing the double ratchet variants that everybody uses today. Reading between the lines, I think what happened at IETF 115 or something is that the MLS team got together and said, yeah, we did it. What do we do now? I know, let's build a messaging protocol on top of MLS, which is going to be completely hard-coded to MLS, and it's going to use all the best features of MLS, and it's all about MLS, and this is our opportunity to build this interoperable thing on top of MLS. And they may have slightly forgotten about the DMA or the interoperability aspects of it, because the problem that we have right now is how do you get actual Google and actual Apple and actual WhatsApp talking together before March of 2024, which is the deadline for one-to-one chat working in the real world. So I would posit that going and betting the farm and hard-coding it on MLS might not be the smartest thing to do. Instead, you want something like linearized matrix, which pragmatically just glues it all together. As you might tell, there is some friction happening, therefore, between the MLS maximalist purist contingent versus the hacky bridge pragmatic matrix people who are trying to basically figure out whether MIMI is going to be a useful Swiss Army knife to glue things together, or is it going to be the one true platonic ideal of an MLS-based protocol. Watch this space. We failed to get to consensus on it at IETF 117 in San Francisco, and so they produced a design team, which is apparently the appropriate way to solve fights at IETF. And there are 7 of us on the design team. You've got me and Travis from Matrix. You've got Google, you've got Wire, you've got Cisco, and you've got Wicker. And I'm probably forgetting somebody, which is embarrassing. So hopefully they're not listening to me complain about them in the community summit talk. Anyway, but either way, we've been trying to get to consensus over the last few weeks on it and have yet to get to consensus. So presumably we'll need to form another design team in order to work on the impasse we have with the current design team. Anyway, talking of MLS, work on implementing MLS on top of Matrix rather than having it MLS all the way down is going pretty well. Hubert, Uhareg to his friends, if you speak Rot 13, has been working away implementing it on Element Web. It even supports key backup now. Go and check it out on arewemlsyet.com. Possibly coming to a labs flag in a room version near you sometime soon. And interesting to note that it uses normal matrix device lists to track which devices are in the room, which in some ways is the root of the contention with the MLS folks on MIMI, because either you basically need a way to track what device is there. Do you track the membership of the group in Matrix, or do you track it in MLS itself? And if you do it in MLS itself, how do you keep Matrix in sync, or do you keep Matrix in sync? So at the moment, our implementation is subject to the problem of server-controlled group membership, which means that a nasty sysadmin can lie to you about the devices present in a room, and you have to rely on verification and trust to spot that somebody has gone and added a malicious device into the conversation. Clearly, that sucks. We need to do better. However, quite how we do that, whether we flush out bad users and devices using Matrix state res, or whether we leverage MLS, or do both, is basically the holy war that is raging within MIMI as we speak. Finally, account portability. We're finally making progress on account portability. This is MSC 4014, which is the second iteration, or third iteration actually, of MSC 1228, if you know your MSC numbers. The work is happening here in Dendrite because this is real Wild West territory, massive vicious changes. Doing it on Dendrite as a relatively young and fresh code base that is there, ripe for the abuse, is much easier than doing it to poor Synapse, which needs to be rock solid and run communication for gazillions of people. And the PR actually merged a few weeks ago. The headline news is that under the hood, it replaces the sender field on events with per room sender keys. And the sender key is per device, no, it's per user, but per room curve 25519 or ed 25519 key to identify that user within that room. Good news is that this version of the MSC means no client changes. works straight out of the box with existing clients because the server maps the keys back into MX IDs and puts them on the sender field on the event at the last minute in the CS API. Work is going on to try to integrate the user identity of the cryptographic IDs which we have for these sender keys with the cryptographic IDs of end-to-end encryption, because it would obviously suck if we have totally different keys flying around for tracking what a user is. And worth noting, it doesn't actually give portability. It's just replacing matrix IDs with these crypto IDs. Good news for GDPR, though, because we are no longer signing PII in the form of matrix IDs into the DAG of matrix rooms. So next up, beyond figuring out this encrypted identity problem, is client-initiated portability. So me as a user wants to move from matrix.org to element.io. How do we do the permissions and the dance and critically the key sharing around that? And beyond that, server-initiated portability, multi-homed accounts, who knows? At the moment, it's a bit of a skunkworks project, much to the horror of some, but hopefully we'll get it less skunkworks in the near future. Final updates. Matrix Foundation is getting proper independence and spreading its wings. We have hired Josh, who used to be president of the open source initiative last month, as the very first managing director and employee of the foundation. And his mission, whether he chooses to accept it or not, although I guess he did, is to make the foundation operationally independent and self-sustaining. So not dependent on handouts from Element to survive, but instead be supported by the wider ecosystem. Please financially support the foundation if you're building on Matrix to protect the project's foundations. I mean, it's really straightforward. A surprising number of really high-profile projects, like I know LuxChat in Luxembourg, the official state messenger for Luxembourg, does not support the foundation, nor does it work with Element. Many local authorities in Germany seem to end up working with some local vendor who, again, doesn't in any way contribute back to the bottom of the stack. There is massive risk of the classic XKCD cartoon of your dependency tree collapsing because there isn't sufficient support of people building on top. Go to matrix.org/membership to see how to do so. I think Josh is going to do a remote cameo. Jan, is this true? Is Josh? No, it's not true. That's sad. That'd been fun. Oh well. Then finally, next-gen updates. On the Element side, the teams had to focus on Element X, Element Core, doing all the core, well, a lot of the core matrix dev, end-to-end encryption, sliding sync, etc., as well as increasingly having to build commercial products like Element Server Suite, which is awesome, by the way. In the absence of funding from the foundation, though, we've got a problem on next-gen projects. So Dendrite, the team has moved to sliding sync and account portability. Peer-to-peer matrix is basically on hold, but the team is kind of the same as Dendrite, so also working on sliding sync and account portability. Low bandwidth matrix is completely on hiatus, although it has been now for 2 years anyway. And poor third room, even though it is still the world's best standards-based spatial collaboration system, is paused indefinitely, and the team is disbanded, with Robert going off to work on a really cool indie game and the rest of the folks heading in respective directions. If you want to see next-gen development happening, the best way of doing it is to put money into the Matrix Foundation, who will then figure out how to get this stuff funded one way or another. And that's it. I'm almost on time. Thank you. Yeah. Do we have time for questions?
Yes, we have time for questions.
We don't. Oh.
We have.
Make up your mind.
Okay, I already have a mic, so maybe I'm first. You already mentioned good. It's me.
Okay. Oh, hello.
You already mentioned good news for Matrix and GDPR on one of the slides. What's your take on this Matrix and GDPR thing, especially for the retention of data? Because like MXIDs are kind of need to be stored forever, or maybe a hash of them. And in general, data is shared a lot to many different places, and it's not sure how it's deleted. What's your take on this? Do you know anything on how well that works?
So back in May 2018, when GDPR came into force, on the Element side, we decided consciously to try to do it right and be the first decentralized project to basically set a precedent of how should GDPR interoperate with decentralized systems like Matrix? Because we knew that ActivityPub and others would come along and hit the same problems. And we spent a lot of money on very expensive data privacy lawyers to try to go and figure it all out. Now, the good news is that I think Matrix is compliant in all respects other than the personal identifying information in the MXIDs. That is literally why we have MSC1228 and now MSC4014 doing these pseudo-IDs. Now, if you look carefully at the terms of use of the Matrix server, it says, hey, we're GDPR compliant, but due to the fundamental structure of Matrix, you need to be aware of this limitation. Are you okay with this to continue? Which, from a legal perspective, is okay. It's obviously a bit unfortunate to ask people to agree to a kind of carve-out when they use the service. But that is why we've always designed that, and we wrote the original MSC in 2018. I'm very glad we're finally implementing it now in the context also of account portability. But the other bits, like storing all the data forever and honoring redactions, setting the semantic that when I send you a message, you get a copy of that message. It is no longer owned by me. It's on your server. It's like email. It's a really important thing that we wanted to set a precedent for. Because there is the alternative interpretation of the law could be to say, well, hang on a second, it was my message, I wrote it in the first place, and I don't care that I've gone and printed it out and handed it to everybody in the room. I should now have the right to break into your house in the middle of the night and set light to those pieces of paper. I think that's silly, and it's much more reasonable to think, I've given you a copy of it now, I relinquished ownership. But we wanted to get that right, and I think we did. There is a question as to whether you should have mega redacts as the ability to obliterate everything you have ever said in one fell swoop by redaction, so an advisory measure, obviously. We haven't done that. We think it would be massively prone to abuse, frankly. It would be the obvious thing that if somebody owns somebody's account, they can just now put out a little sort of mega redaction that just obliterates them from the history of the internet, which on one level might be a win, on the other level might not end up being amazing. And there are a couple of other edge cases that we reasoned through. So honestly, from my perspective, I think we're in quite a good place, particularly with MSC 4014. But it's also a grey area, and we tried to define the rules, and it seems that other people have now copied the precedent that we set.
Right, thanks.
I've got a question about here to your left here.
Hello.
I've got a question about sliding sync. Do you have a tutorial for people like us who run their own home server? How to set it up, preferably in Docker or something?
Yeah, so Thibaut Martin, our amazing developer advocate for the Matrix Foundation, has done a really nice little YouTube and written tutorial, which if you use your favorite search engine and just look for sliding sync tutorial, it will come up because I did it yesterday and found the URL. I think people are unnecessarily worried about the hassle of running a proxy because it sounds like, oh my God, I've got a totally new thing to worry about. I've doubled my system in complexity and all the rest of it. In practice, it's a pretty simple system. It's a Bongo process and a Postgres database, and it doesn't have any configuration. Doesn't even have a config file from memory. You set it running, and it does its thing. The only failure mode we've seen with people running it has been forgetting to upgrade it because they forget it exists, because it's just sitting there in the background. And because, as you heard, we are iterating like crazy on sliding sync, you get really weird behavior if we fix a bug on element X, which requires a matching bug fix on the proxy, and then it all gets out of sync, and we get lots of bug reports. In fact, I think the only sliding sync bug reports we've had in the last last month or so have been due to stale sliding sync proxies. Adding it to a Docker compose should be really simple because, again, it's such a simple thing. Probably the only real bad thing about it is that it does increase your storage footprint. So not only do you have Synapse tracking all of your messages, but now you've got this cache basically being managed by the proxy. But don't be scared of it. Please give it a go. There was some guy on Hacker News yesterday after we launched Matrix 2.0 who came in saying, why are you making me run another thing? I hate you. And then literally 25 minutes later, he came back saying, oh, actually, that wasn't so painful after all. So hopefully, give it a go. And obviously, it will end up natively in home servers eventually anyway, but we don't want to rush it because it would be stupid if all the home server implementations enthusiastically did their perfect sliding sync implementations, and then we turned around and said, well, you know that bit where we said we were going to simplify it lots? It would be very frustrating. So let's get it stable, get it MSC'd on a proxy, and then that's the point for everybody to go wild and make it native. Hello.
Hi. I would like to know how, or if there is a roadmap to deprecate the old SDKs, like the JS SDK or iOS or Android SDKs.
iOS and Android SDKs are dead, deprecated. JS SDK is not. It's used in the basis of Element Web. It is used obviously in lots of bots and bridges, and instead we've got them taking the Rust SDK crypto into it. I imagine it's going to be there for the foreseeable because there are just so many things using it. And honestly, no, let's see how well it performs with the Rust crypto and the JS layer. We're not sure what comes next for Element Web and whether we replace we try to replace the whole thing with Rust SDK, or whether we keep polishing JS SDK, or we do a gradual convergence. Johannes, if you're out there anywhere, we've got Johannes, or has he fled wisely? He's responsible for figuring out what we do with Element Web.
So this will also include security fixes?
No, I mean, there's a difference between deprecated, as in we're not doing anything to it, versus fixing security. Obviously, there are a lot of apps out there who do use the legacy iOS and Android SDK too, and for security stuff, yeah, that will continue to be supported until, well, probably the last people seriously use it.
I see. May I ask a second question about OpenID Connect?
Yeah.
So eventually it will be possible with Synapse to just hook up something like a keycloak to it, which will then take over the authentication flow and give you the actual keycloak access token, which will be used to authenticate against Matrix. How will devices and sessions be linked eventually?
I think there may be a nice diagram of this. If you go to Matrix Authentication Service here, or where's the actual project itself? Right, yeah. This is basically what's happening under the hood here. So. Fault. Eve, well, take it from me that you've got a fancy diagram where you've got MAS as the kind of matrix-specific IDP shim talking both through to the upstream IDP. Yeah, there we go. So you've got MAS here with a compatibility layer for old matrix clients. You've got something like Element X or whatever talking OIDC to this, talking through to Keycloak for upstream OIDC support. And I think your question is the green arrow, but the home server now has to rely on MAS to determine validity for access tokens. And likewise, if you want to do migrations between the accounts there and the ones being managed by MAS, then you need to have some kind of dashed blue line. So the answer is it's a green arrow.
Nice. And MAS will eventually become part of Synapse then, or?
I think MAS has been designed to be a really, really lightweight chunk of Rust, so you can pick it up and embed it into Synapse, to the extent that it would be pulled in like the other Rust dependencies that Synapse has today, like some of the hot path state resolution stuff or presence or whatever it is.
All right. Thank you very much.
That's okay.
Hi.
Hello.
So I have also two questions. So the first one, how does the Matrix SDK crypto, the Rust thing you mentioned, compare to the crypto stuff that was introduced at FOSDEM? And does that fix the common encryption issues?
So it is the same as I was hyping FOSDEM, and the difference being that it's now landed everywhere. So that's right. So yeah, it's the same thing that we announced, or that we've been working on for ages, honestly. The difference is that we're now finally at the point of putting it into Element Web as well as everything else. So the code base is, what, probably 3 years old now, and the actual encryption implementation for the DOSMATs, the kind of low-level crypto, is relatively new. I guess it's a year and a half old now. But we got the DOSMATs audited, and it works. And frankly, using Element X to talk to other people on Element X right now, it works. I haven't had any of the classic nightmare, weird race condition UTDs or UICs of the past. So hopefully it will fix things, unless it turns out that some of the problems are on the home servers. And I have a hunch there is still a bug where two device messages, when you federate them across servers, can sometimes get lost. We've never reproduced it or caught it in the act, but in the end, if the traffic doesn't flow, then the encryption isn't going to work.
So this is, if I'm correct, at FOSDEM, or right before FOSDEM, there was a beta on iOS. So this is the Element Web add-on to that.
Correct. So
Okay,
the beta for Element iOS and Android shipped months ago.
That's why I was asking.
And should have improved the encryption reasonably there. But because, let's face it, over half the people on Matrix are using Element Web rather than a mobile thing, even though we'd made iOS and Android work, the perception of flakiness was still completely undermined by the buggy old web. So that's why it's so good that next week, hopefully, we get everybody speaking the same crypto dialect.
That would be awesome. And the other question was, is linearized matrix planned to work with the DAG, or will there be separate room types for hub and spoke and like the full mesh rooms?
So linearized matrix, frankly, is a bit of a straw man to throw into the Mimi work to say, hey, look, if we just build this Mimi on top of matrix, it would look like this. The problem is that other people have very strong ideas of how it should look, which doesn't involve any matrix at all. So that is why we're now stuck in this tug of war, trying to figure out what blend of linearized matrix and what blend of MLS maximalism you would use to build this protocol. So to answer your question, yes, it's got a DAG. It's a linearized DAG, so it's a linked list. And if you interop with wider matrix, then you would have the bushy tree-style DAG, and you would linearize that on the hub, which is talking through to the linearized side of things. So it worked really nicely as a model for interop, but you would not believe the level of tension arguing about whether it is the responsibility of the transport or the signaling protocol, i.e. matrix, to sign messages into a DAG, or whether that should all be done by the end-to-end encryption, i.e. MLS.
I see. So I guess you're really trying to do, okay, we can compromise on the transport, but we really want that message format to even have interoperability with matrix in the end.
Yes, and then the message format has also drifted off with a proposition coming in which is identical to matrix in all respects, except every field is named slightly differently, and it uses TLS presentation layer as the serialization format rather than JSON. Not saying that we should use JSON, but that's the kind of tension that we're seeing.
To be honest, that has advantages to signing, though. Canonicalizing JSON is fun.
Yeah, it is, totally. And we need to get away from JSON and canonicalize JSON. Use the binary format. Perhaps TLS presentation layer is the right answer to that. Does anybody think that TLS presentation layer, the thing that you use to negotiate TLS these days, would be a good serialization format for matrix events? You may not have strong thoughts on this, but you may. Stunned silence. Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Sorry, we're overrunning on timing, I think, maybe, or not. Jan is looking.
I think it's all right.
Well, with that said, any other questions? Or, oh, there's one there.
Yeah, thank you for your talk. I work for a larger German public sector. And if we want to put money into matrix.org, or the matrix organization as such, depending on the amount, we need to tender and such stuff. With whom can I talk about that? That we get a solution where we can put money into the matrix org, and at the same time don't get run over by our accountings.
So I think there are two ways of doing it. Either you go down the non-profit route and you donate to the Matrix Foundation, which, as I said, is now increasingly operational in terms of selling memberships. So, I think there's no limit on the size of membership, but the largest tier is $500,000 a year, intended for big public sector and private sector organizations to say, right, we like Matrix, we're building on it, and we want to make sure that the core project is safe and sound. In terms of negotiating tenders for justifying a non-profit spend, honestly, I've heard that's quite hard, particularly in Germany. I'm not an expert here. You may be better off talking to Patrick, who I saw lurking around, who works at Element with me. but is also the managing director of our German GmbH, and so has more experience of procurement shenanigans. Alternatively, right now, about 95% of the work that goes into the Matrix Foundation is donated by Element. So an alternative route is to buy something from the nice people at Element, which then relieves the pressure on them donating stuff to the foundation. But I'm wearing a Matrix hoodie today rather than an Element CEO one. So come and talk about it afterwards and we can try to figure something out. There should be a way though, because if it's just procurement logistics stopping people from supporting the project, that really feels like it should be a tractable problem.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you for being up for contributing. Any last? Oh, we've got a final one here, if we're letting him go again.
So I've got a question on the VoIP stuff. Is it planned for some time in the future to also use Matrix as a transport layer for the data? Because when at some point in time we do peer-to-peer via, for example, Bluetooth or so, the whole WebRTC IP-based thing won't really work anymore because we may have peer-to-peer nodes which are not even connected to the internet. So they will be excluded from Matrix call, whatever it's going to be called, VoIP. Is that right?
So I personally don't think we should put large amounts of real-time data over Matrix. Matrix is great as a rendezvous protocol in order to set up a WebRTC stream or negotiate a live kit, SFU, or whatever it is. The idea of trying to put large amounts of binary real-time data into a Matrix DAG or even two device messages just feels like it's a good way to DOS your home server for absolutely no good reason when it can go out of band between the clients. Now, for peer-to-peer Matrix specifically, we effectively have an overlay network in the form of Pinecone, which is heavily influenced by Yggdrasil, which is another overlay network, which actually gives you an IPv6 network. So even if it is going over Bluetooth Low Energy or carrier pigeon, you can still get an IP overlay that you'll be able to hand to WebRTC. That's not exposed currently in Pinecone in peer-to-peer Matrix, and at this rate, it's going to be a while before that comes up. But at least when running over an IP network like AirDrop or AWDL between two iOS devices, I've done peer-to-peer VoIP calls, and it worked without a single line of code being changed in the client because it just negotiates WebRTC over the IP that is there.
Right, perfect. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.